everyone, Carol here at Oak House Journals. I'm going to do a very quick tutorial on how I make these tiny little tassels. I sometimes include them on my tags in my journals, and I promised a lady who bought one of my journals, I have to own up, a good while ago now. I promised her that I would do a tutorial showing how I make these. There are 1,000,001 tutorials out on YouTube showing how to make tassels. The way I make them is absolutely no different from anybody else. The only difference is that the ones I make are slightly smaller scale. The ones in here, without taking into account the size of the jump ring, the ones in here are either 1.5 centimeters in length or 1 centimeter, so they are pretty small, but I think they just look really cute as little embellishments to the page or to tags in journals. So as I've made a few of these recently, or yesterday, I just thought now was the time that I kept my word and made a quick video on how I do it. So obviously what you will need is thread and a jump ring. So let's start with a jump ring. You can use any size jump ring. What I suggest you do though is that you have your jump ring, let me show you, opened and ready to go, because it just makes life so much easier when the time comes for you to use your jump ring if it's already open. And obviously you only want one jump ring per tassel. I have 2 here because I have an amazing ability to ping jump rings across the room with great frequency. So I've got a spare here just in case of that eventuality. The next thing I suggest you have to hand is either of these. So long nose tweezers or long nose pliers. Either of these will work just as well, but it's for grabbing hold of your jump ring and threading it through the threads in a moment or two. The other thing that I suggest you use or you have handy is just some of your thread threaded through a needle and set to one side. Now you don't have to use a needle, but I prefer to, and I will show you why in a moment. And threaded through, you probably want about 8 inches or so of thread. You won't be using all of that thread by any means, but if you work with your thread too short, it makes life a little bit more tricky. So I've probably got about 10 inches on here. That's way too much, but it's handy. So just have that off to one side as well, somewhere where you can easily grab it. And the other thing you need is a fork. Now this is a dinner fork. You can use a dessert fork, doesn't really matter, makes no difference. You could use a bow tire and use the pegs on that, but a fork is big enough for making these little tiny tassels. A bone tire probably would make the tassels a lot bigger, and obviously not what I want for the journals that I make anyway. And the next thing you want is the thread that you are going to be making your tassel with. Now you can make it with any threads, but obviously the one thing to bear in mind is the thicker your thread, the thicker your tassel is going to be. Now you can reduce the thickness of your tassel if you're using thick thread by not wrapping it round so many times. I quite like my tassels to be small and dinky, and so I've just got here normal sewing cotton. So I would use this for any sort of normal day-to-day sewing, such as sewing on a button or using in my sewing machine. Now this cotton that I've actually got here is slightly different in that it's machine embroidery thread, so it's got a silky feel to it. It doesn't knot, but you can use any thread, any normal sewing cotton that you want. It'll be the same thickness, there's no difference. And let me just show you, I was gifted this And this looks like a horrendous tangle of machine embroidery thread. But it actually isn't, because machine embroidery thread has a silky finish to it. I can just pull this out and it comes out really easily out of this what looks like a tangled mess without knotting. But you don't have to have this, just normal. You can make these tassels, and I do make these tassels out of just normal sewing thread. So let's get started and I'll show you how to make them. So all you need is a little bit of an end piece there, about 1.5 inches or 2 inches, and just lay it across the prongs of your fork about 1/2 inch in, and just trap it between your thumb and the fork. So if I show you there, it's just trapped and this thread is loose. And then all I do is I wrap it round the fork, still leaving my left hand thumb holding that end thread. And I just wrap it round about 25 or 30 times. Now, if you prefer not to have your tassels so thick, you can wrap it round less. If you prefer your tassels fatter, wrap it round more. It's entirely up to you, and it's a matter of personal preference. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just wrap my thread round. So I'm going to go silent because I'm going to be counting this, and I'm just going to drop my glasses down. So now I've just wrapped it around 25 there because I did start off initially with 5. So there's my end thread, or my starting thread, and that's my end thread. And there's my cotton wrapped round my fork like so. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to thread a jump ring through between the first, between the first and the second prong. And I'm going to thread my jump ring down between that prong. So this is where either your pincers or your long nose pliers come in handy, because you're working one-handed now. You've got your threads trapped between your thumb and index finger on your fork, and you need to pick up your jump ring. So I'm going to thread that through like so. And what I tend to do is I tend to use the prongs of my fork and my pliers to just close up my jump ring at this stage. Now I've just done that. I hope everybody could see. Let me just try and twizzle it round and show you. I've just closed up my jump ring just by pressing it against the prongs of my fork. Now you can leave that to a later stage if you want to, but I tend to find by doing it now, it's less likely that I will lose my threads once I take it off the fork and it works its way through the gap of the jump ring. It's just easier to do that. So there's my jump ring, and it's just through that first loop of thread between my first and my second prong. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, still keeping the thread tight, I'm just going to use my index finger behind my jump ring and in front of my jump ring, and I'm just going to hold as I pull the thread off the fork. And there's my jump ring, and there's my threads. Now this is why, as I say, I close up my jump ring, because at this stage, if you haven't got the jump ring in the right place, then your threads are going to work their way through the gap. So just pinching your threads slightly below the jump ring. Now I'm not, my thumb and index finger are not tight up next to the jump ring. There is a slight gap there so that my jump ring can move quite happily. And at this stage, I just chop off my starter thread and my finishing thread. I pick up my thread on the needle and cotton, and I just pull my thread through my index finger and my thumb, like so. I'm just threading it through between my index finger and thumb, so I'm catching the end of the thread on my needle, also between my thumb and index finger. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap that thread around just below the jump ring 3 or 4 times, like so. And then what I do is I knot that thread onto my tassel. So I go round again, create a loop, and just thread my needle through the loop and let it tighten up and form a knot. Now don't pull too hard because this is just cotton, so you could snap it, but you do want to close up and have a fairly tight tension. So let me do that again. So there's my jump ring, my threads all wrapped round. I'm creating a loop, and sometimes it's actually easier if you stick a finger out and wrap your loop. You just wrap your loop round the back of the jump ring, round your finger, so that you've created a loop. Take your needle through that loop and underneath. Take up the slack. Just take your finger out. Whoops, it's just slipped off. Take your finger out and just tighten up that knot. Let me do that again for you. Oops, daisy. Skewered my finger there. So make a loop. Take it round the back of your jump ring. So there's my loop. Bring your needle up and through that loop. And as you can see, I'm just taking up the tension, like so. And the reason I like to have a needle and thread is because now that I've done those 3 little knots, I like to just do a couple of stitches through the threads below the jump ring. So there's 1, and there's 2, and there's my 3rd one. And that just makes sure everything stays absolutely in place. I'm just going to trim off that thread there. Now I didn't close up my jump ring completely. There we go. So that's what our little tassel looks like now. And this is when you decide what length you want your, still not close that jump ring. This is when you can decide what length you want your tassel to be. And for me, what I tend to do is I just kind of gauge it by eye, trap it between my thumb and index finger, grab my scissors and just chop. You get bits everywhere like I've done. And there you have it. Your little tassel. Super easy. And I've got another one here that I'm going to trim again. So all I do, trap it between my thumb and index finger, grab my scissors and just snip up to my nail. And the great thing about making these little things is that if you decide that you want them longer, you chop them longer. Or if you just chop them long and you decide you want them shorter, you just chop them shorter. Couldn't be easier. So there we go, everybody. Really, really simple, easy tutorial on how to make tassels. And they're super cute, aren't they? They're so easy to do as well. So hope you found that useful, and have a go at making some yourself. Take care, everybody. Bye bye now.